We as Gentiles, by natural birth in the providence of God, 2 millennia later and half the world away, have been reconciled unto the Father and brought into his family is a blessing unlike any other that we have the eternal joy and privilege of partaking in. He has given us a new identity that is profound. As such, today we'll examine what this distinction entailed and what our former condition as Gentiles was, what our new status in Christ is as both Jew and Gentile, and what God has been building in his Son throughout history. So first, our former condition without Christ. Carrying on in verse 11, who are called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands. So physical circumcision in the flesh was a sign and seal of the covenant God made with his people Israel in the Old Testament, beginning under the Abrahamic covenant and reinforced under the Mosaic covenant at Mount Sinai. The inclusion in these covenants under this sign meant one was an Israelite and was a part of God's people. By Paul's day, most of Israel had been dispersed, with only the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and parts of the tribe of Levi remaining in Judea. That being the case, to belong to the commonwealth of Israel meant one was a Jew. Under the Mosaic law and Levitical system, only one man, the high priest, was allowed to enter the Holy of Holies at the peril of his own life should the conditions laid out by God not be properly met to enter into his very presence. He would be struck dead by God's presence, such as the weight of his holiness and glory. There were degrees of separation within the temple emanating outward from the Holy of Holies. And I'm not going to go into depth on each and every division, but they included the sanctuary, the court of the priests, the court of Israel, the court of women, and the court of the Gentiles. These divisions represented the need for purification and ritual observance to even approach the God of Israel. Those who did not belong to Israel, the Gentiles or Goyim or Goy, were looked down on by Jews, since the Jews considered themselves to belong to the true and living God, whereas the Gentiles were forsaken and cast off from God. The Gentiles did not bear the physical mark of circumcision and thus were not partakers in God's covenant people. So when Paul says, you Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, he's referring to the derogatory name-calling that the Jews would use towards Gentiles and the low view that they had of them. To get an idea of the hostility which existed towards Gentiles through a religious lens, one need only read what was written above the gate between the court of the Gentiles and the inner temple courts, in which only Jews were allowed. It reads, no Gentile shall enter inward of the partition and barrier around the temple, and whoever is caught shall be responsible to himself for his subsequent death. To be considered unworthy to participate in the rest of the temple rituals was a travesty, given that the temple was integral to true worship of Yahweh. The Gentiles were the furthest off, only allowed to participate from a distance, and were thought to be inferior as a result.